Hey, Kennedy.
Hello.
Well, you look cozy next to the fire.
Yeah, I'm always cold.
Oh my
So,
gosh, it's so cold here. I think it got warm and they turned the buildings over to air conditioning. And
yeah.
so now, like, the air conditioning is on and it's cold outside.
Yeah.
So I'm here in my office with a space heater on the floor.
Yep. Yep. I was like, I need to turn the fire on. This is just not going to work for me.
Yeah. You got a gas log in there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that at my house and it's nice. You just flick it on and it goes.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So, yeah.
Super easy.
Did you get my email?
Yeah, I did. I actually just responded to you. It's helpful. I don't know what you mean by the honest versus dishonest displays though, or like how that
Okay.
relates to my topic, I guess.
Yeah. So, one of the ways of avoiding some of the costs is to basically, well, one of the ways in which you can either increase your success at attracting a mate or in some cases decrease the cost is by providing dishonest signals. And so when I was in grad school, I was doing some field work, and in this place we were working in a prairie in Texas. And as we were walking out to our field site, we went through this gap in this line of trees, this hedgerow. And there was a spider that had set up a large web spanning the distance between these trees and had caught some pretty big grasshoppers in the web. Well, there's a type of insect called a scorpion fly. Not a fly and it's not a scorpion, but it's a winged insect that looks kind of like a scorpion. And these guys are known to give nuptial gifts to females. And so they'll generally catch an insect, they'll offer it to a female, and then while she's eating it, they will mate with her. And it's kind of like the hanging flies. The longer you can copulate with the female, the more sperm gets transferred. Well, we were walking through this gap one day, and we saw these old carcasses in this spider web, and they were all dried out. They had had all of their biomass sucked out of them by the spider, but the spider hadn't cut them out of her web yet. And they were many times bigger than the scorpion fly. And we saw sitting on this dead husk of a grasshopper, a scorpion fly hanging on to the grasshopper corpse. And it was, oh, and it was presumably doing that because it looked like that this male had been capable of pulling down a gigantic prey item to offer it to a female. But of course, when the female came over and started to feed on it, she would discover that there was actually nothing of nutritive value in there. And so what the male basically did was it's signaling a dishonest signal to the female saying, oh, look at this big bad grasshopper I collected, which gets her to come over. And he did that without having to go to any of the time and energy of acquiring such a prey item. So even if he gets not much time at all with her while she figures out that there's nothing there of value, whatever time he gets to copulate with her is time that he wouldn't have, and it's basically free to him. So dishonest signaling can be used in a lot of ways in a lot of different contexts, wherein an individual will signal incorrect information to another individual, whether that's a competing male or whether that is a potential mate. Whenever you see animals do this, or men at bars who have had a few too drinks and they're about to get in a fight, what do they do immediately?
When they're
Like
about
as
to
you're,
fight,
what's that?
when they're about to get in a fight.
Yeah, if you've probably never hung out in questionable bar scenes, but whenever you see two guys at a bar and one of them has made the other one mad, what's the first thing that two dudes do when they are building up to fight one another?
Like stand up, get in each other's face or something.
They stand up, they put out their chest, they spread their shoulders. What are they trying to do?
Establish dominance.
They're trying to make themselves look bigger than they actually are in the hopes that the other individual backs down. If that's effective, you've basically avoided a physical confrontation. If it's not effective, if the signal is dishonest in that you've made yourself look bigger than you actually are, you get the crap beat out of you. If it's an honest signal, then you walk away from the fight still standing. And so you'll see lizards that anoles we saw at the beginning of the semester, those anoles that are doing the DUAP, what they generally do is they turn their bodies face-wise. And on some anoles, there's a ridge, there's a muscular ridge around the back that they can raise that makes them look bigger in profile than they actually are. They're not really any bigger, but they can raise this ridge along their back that makes them appear bigger. And in that way, it's kind of a dishonest signal because they haven't, what's that?
What organism was that?
Anoles.
Oh,
at the very beginning, yeah. At the very beginning of the semester when we were talking about just behavior in general, I played some clips of them in those first couple of days. So anyway, lots of ways of deceiving other individuals, and oftentimes that deceit saves you time or saves you energy or both, or allows you to compete, for example, in male-male competition, in a way that makes you succeed where you might not be able to if you were a more honest signaler of information. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Before we start the lecture, can you just clarify what next week looks like? Because I was confused about the daily schedule when I was looking at it yesterday.
Next week
there's like a star, and
there's
like
what?
there's like a star on one day, and like instead of it saying Thursday, and there's like a note about you being at a conference and some different stuff.
That conference has been canceled. Let me go get the schedule. But basically, it's the same as it really always has been. So this coming week, you have an exam on Wednesday, and you have I don't know why that is a star there, but that star basically corresponds to next Friday is when undergraduate colloquium was originally scheduled. And we're no longer having undergraduate colloquium, but rather than change the schedule and tell students, oh, we're going to hold classes on that Friday when you were planning on holding classes that Thursday, we are going to stick with the original schedule. So we will have class Monday, you'll have an exam on Wednesday, then we will meet on Thursday as if it were a Friday because Friday was supposed to be undergraduate colloquium.
And the exam is a Socrative test.
It is a Socrative test. So if you do not have the Socrative app available, or I think actually there's just a link that you can click on and will take you to Socrative's website. But make sure that you can do that. Although all of you have done that with me because all of you have had evolution and ecology with me.
So what is the kind of, I guess, format for that? So
it's going to be multiple. It's going to be all multiple choice, and it's going to be simpler multiple choice than was on the last exam because Socrative doesn't allow me as many options.
And so, is it timed? Is there like a time limit?
Yeah. What it will do is it will open at 12:30 and it will close at 1:35.
Okay. So basically, like if you're still in the Socrative app at 12:35, it'll just like be done.
At 1:35, it will just boot you out. Yep.
Okay.
It'll say
it's a multiple choice test, so it should not take you like the full time.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So and then
it's gonna be 50 multiple choice questions.
50.
Yeah.
Can you save your answers along the way in case of like internet malfunctions and blah blah blah?
I think oh man, let me see. I'm not sure. I think what happens is that if something goes wrong, it boots you out, and it does save your answers because when we do pre-tests and post-tests, I will frequently get 2 submissions from students, one of which is partially finished exam and one of which is a fully finished exam. And I think what it does is it saves your exam up to that point, but I don't think it allows you to go back. So
you can't like review your answers?
Oh, you can review your answers, but if like your internet crashes in the middle of it you can't log back on it, and it will have saved all those answers. It'll be logging back on and starting over from scratch.
Yeah, I just get worried because I was taking an anatomy test a couple weeks ago and my internet crashed and I had to start over and there was a timing thing and blah 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 and I'm
Yep.
like, oh, so if that happens, can we just text you and?
If that happens, email me. What I will then have to do is, after everybody's finished with that version of the exam, I'll launch a new version of the exam for you specifically. And it'll be the same exam. It's just going to be, you know,
Different order.
it'll save it into a different file when it's all over with. So no, we can work around that.
Okay, cool beans.
Can you make sure we have the ability to go back and review questions?
Yes, I always set them up that way.
Cool, thank you.
So there are different ways in which you can do it. One of which is an instructor controlled method, and then the other one is a way in which students can freely navigate. And under the freely navigate, you can freely navigate and you can go back and change questions. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
I typically always set it up that way.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? All right, give me a minute. I set myself an alarm so that I don't run over time, but I set the wrong time on it. So now crickets will chirp at me when I get to the end of class, and Kennedy won't have to say, hey, dude, are you ever going to let us go? All right. Other questions from material we covered on Wednesday, I guess it was, because today's Friday, right? Yeah,
Yep.
Today's Friday.
Can we just start back? Like, will you just re-go over association and then?
Oh, yeah, sure. As a matter of fact, that is exactly. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
That is exactly where I was. So, yeah. So when we think of, whoa.
Sorry, my bad.
What is that?
Text message notification.
Ah. So when we think about why external fertilization in fishes leads to so much male parental care, there are these different explanations. Certainty of paternity. When you have external fertilization, you know that those were your sperm that got squirted all over those eggs. So because you have certainty of paternity, you are more likely to care for those eggs. Order of gamete release is another thing that has been proposed in the past. The authors of your textbook are not big fans of that idea for reasons that we discussed last time. And the last of these was the association hypothesis. So this is the third of these reasons why males may spend more parental care in fishes. And this idea is that the more time, or the more closely associated you are with the embryos, the more likely you are to take on parental care duties. So with internal fertilization, the females have more association with embryos, therefore they'll provide more parental care. With external fertilization, depending on the mechanism of external fertilization, if the male had to build a nest and guard a territory, et cetera, he may be more associated with the embryos and as a result may be more likely to provide parental care. And so because of this, nest guarding has been proposed as a pre-adaptation to male parental care because of this increased association of males with their offspring, because they maintain a territory, they build a nest, the females come and deposit eggs in that nest, and then they leave, they have the opportunity to leave. His choice is either to stay there and guard those eggs or leave and maybe have those eggs fertilized by another male or eaten by a predator, et cetera, et cetera. So now he's hanging around the eggs for a longer period of time because he's created this nest for the eggs, And as a result of that, he may also then be more likely to provide further parental care. And nest guarding by itself is parental care of a sort. So male parental care is more common in species that are territorial rather than in species that are not territorial. So these are all bits of information that support the idea that having an association with offspring will make you more likely to provide parental care for those offspring. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Before you go to the next slide, on the slide prior,
Yeah.
I know that the first line of evidence for the rejection was like that external fertilization has like simultaneous release, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what was the
In
second?
almost all fishes, it's simultaneous release.
What was the second line?
The second line of evidence is that there are two families of fishes that build foam nests. And what happens when the fish builds the foam nest is the male is building the foam nest where the female will come and deposit her eggs. As he is building the foam nest, he actually deposits his sperm in the foam nest. Then the female comes, deposits her eggs in the foam nest. When the eggs arrive, they get fertilized by the male. So in this case, the male actually releases his gametes first, the female releases her gametes second, but he still remains after she has deposited her eggs and provides nest guarding and things like that for that nest. So the order of gamete release here is such that the male deposits his gametes first, which means that in theory, he should be able to desert first and leave the female stuck with the eggs in the foam nest, but he actually doesn't do that. And so it actually directly contradicts the order of gamete release idea.
Okay,
Clear?
cool. Thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, and Kennedy, there's a note in the PowerPoint down in the comment section that describes that.
Also, why does it say male must release eggs?
Where?
Second bullet.
Oh, because that's a typographic error. Males
Okay.
don't release eggs.
Yeah, I was a little confused by that when I went back over it.
Because that is confusing. Because I'm an idiot.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's supposed to be sperm.
Okay, cool.
When your professor makes a mistake, just rely on what you know about basic biology. All right, what else? It's amazing however many years I've been using these slides and updating them and stuff every year, they still have mistakes in them. So when we think of parental investment, as with many things in animal behavior, we can think of parental investment in terms of costs and benefits. So we can use the same kind of optimality models that we've talked about in the past to think about how much and whether or not you should provide parental care. And those optimality models might differ depending on whether you're talking about investment by females or investment by males. So when you think about these optimality ideas, the question is, what level of parental care is optimal for a parent to expend on offspring? What are the costs and benefits that are implicit in parental care? And so your book presents Trevor's models where you have the benefit, which is B, the reddish line, or the costs that are associated, that is the bluish line. And generally what you would want to do is you would want to exert the amount of parental care, parental investment per offspring, that corresponds to the greatest difference between the benefit line and the cost line, because that's when you're maximizing the cost benefit ratio. Did somebody try and say something a minute ago? No. Okay.
What did you say about the difference between the two, that line in between?
Yeah, so as you put in investment, what happens oftentimes is you get the benefits of investment in a diminishing returns curve. And so you're familiar with diminishing returns curves. So this goes up quickly with a little bit of investment, but the more and more investment you put in, the incremental increase in benefit starts to rise at not as fast of a pace, but the costs are oftentimes linear. And so the difference between these two lines is the cost benefit ratio. How much benefit do you get relative to the cost that you're expending? And so you generally want to provide an amount of investment where these lines are furthest apart, where you're getting the most benefit for the least amount of cost. Does that make sense?
Does this apply to males and females?
Yes, this applies to both males and females, although the shapes of these curves may be different. So for example, the cost curve for males may just be generally lower. It'll have a lower slope because they're not yolking eggs and things like that. So the idea applies to both, but the specifics of the line and the curve might be different.
Got it.
So in this optimality argument, you can also think of this as involving a trade-off between offspring quantity and quality within a single reproductive effort. So you produce 1 litter of offspring or 1 brood of eggs or whatever, and the question is, how many of those offspring are you going to produce, and how does that get balanced with what the quality of those individuals are in that individual brood? Do you produce a lot of low quality offspring, or do you once again produce a fewer amount of higher quality offspring? And oftentimes the quality of offspring is the surrogate for that is just size. And so there is this size number trade-off that we also have to think about. There's also then the trade-off between current investment and future investment. Do you get more out of the deal by continuing to invest in your current reproductive effort, or would you be better off cutting your losses and moving on and reproducing again sometime in the future? So if you make too many small offspring, none of them survive. If you make too few large offspring, you're outcompeted by others producing more offspring. And so that might not be as good of a long-term strategy. So this is a within brood trade-off. So this is one of the things that might be leading to this size number trade-off that we see in organisms. We normally present this as a strictly energetic trade-off, but there may also be a behavioral aspect to it as well. And then there are these trade-offs across broods. Too much investment in the current brood reduces your survival or compromises the energy stores that you have available for future reproduction.
What was the graph that we just looked at?
Oh, this is a size number trade-off. This is for mammals. You've seen this before, I think, both in this class and also in evolutionary ecology. These are for 2 different groups of primates. And as you look at the size of offspring on the x-axis, weaning size, as offspring get bigger, the fertility rate of that species goes down. So this is representing across a phylogenetic tree, a size number trade-off among a bunch of different species of primates, the non-human apes and the other primate groups. And so as size of offspring increases, the number of offspring goes down. And this is the classic size number trade-off. Like I said, I have normally presented this to you in the past as a trade-off that is imposed by energetics. You can either divide up the energy that you have for reproduction into lots of little pieces or fewer number of larger pieces. And those pieces become offspring. They become eggs, ultimately. But there's also this idea that as you're making offspring, larger offspring may be of higher quality. So if you make large offspring, they might be better quality, but you might lose out if you're outcompeted by others producing more offspring that are of lower quality, but still have enough quality to survive. If you make small offspring and too many small offspring, it may be that none of them have the ability to survive. So that could also be implied in this graph that we normally interpret as a purely energetic sort of trade-off.
Got it.
So whatever you invest in the current reproductive effort is energy and time that you cannot invest in future reproductive efforts. As a result, current reproduction may come at the cost of future reproduction. So this is a trade-off now that goes from one brood, one reproductive effort to another reproductive effort. This is illustrated by a paper that's mentioned in your book by Donald Miles and some of his collaborators on western fence, not western fence lizards, side blotch lizards, Uta stansberriana. And so this is the side blotch lizard. It's called the side blotch lizard because it's got a little dark mark on its side there. This is a male displaying. And what they did was back in the 90s, there's a guy named Barry Sinervo who came up with the idea of the rock, paper, scissors game that we've talked about, and also was the guy who designed the bean experiment that we looked at early in the semester. He discovered that you could do little microsurgeries on lizards, and you could basically open up the side of a lizard, make an incision back here, get access to the lizard's ovaries if it was a female, and you could take a little needle and you could see the follicles developing, and you could go in with the needle and you could pop those follicles and prevent them from continuing to develop. And so you could experimentally manipulate the reproductive effort of an individual by changing the number of offspring, and that would then change how they allocated energy to offspring. So you could create females that would produce fewer eggs, but the eggs would be bigger and they would result in bigger offspring. Or you could do what they did, which was basically puncture all of the eggs and have them not reproduce at all. And so what they did was they took some of these lizards, and they had some lizards that were unmanipulated. They had sham operated females who they opened up the abdomen and then sewed them back up, but they didn't ablate any of the follicles. And then they had yolkectomy females, females that they got rid of the follicles developing, and as a result, they didn't go through the process of reproduction. And so in the pre-oviposition period, the yolkectomy females had longer endurance, better endurance than the ones that were yolking eggs. And after they deposited their eggs, and these guys didn't deposit their eggs, but at a similar time period, the yolkectomy ones also had greater endurance. So when you're carrying eggs in the pre-oviposition period, you're basically yolking eggs. You have the added weight of the eggs. You have the physical inability to move as well when you're carrying eggs. And that had an effect on endurance. And then it also had an effect on endurance, in that those individuals that reproduced also had less energy, et cetera, afterwards. So this difference between reproductive groups of individuals and non-reproductive groups of individuals, there are differences in endurance, both while they're carrying eggs and also after they've already deposited the eggs. So there's a heavy energetic cost to reproduction in this species. Yep.
What would you like define endurance as meaning?
If you read your book where they describe this, they put them on a treadmill, and they basically have the treadmill running underneath them, and so the lizard is running along. And if the lizard ever slows down, the researcher taps them on the butt with a Q-tip to continue getting them to run, and they basically run them until they finally have exhausted their energy and they can't run any further. Endurance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so they did this all on treadmills in a lab. And then
what was the sham one again?
The sham is just doing the surgery on them, but not getting rid of the eggs.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
So that's a kind of a test to see if the surgery itself had an effect.
Like a control?
It's a type of control, yep. So the sham ones, which are the triangles, they were operated on, but they didn't get a yolkectomy. And they behaved exactly like the unmanipulated females who were yolking eggs, just like the sham females are yolking eggs. But that surgery didn't slow them down in any way. So then if you look at follicle diameter, so you can also measure follicle diameter on these guys. And as it turns out, the bigger your follicles are, the closer you are to being gravid, as your follicles get bigger and bigger, you're essentially yolking up eggs until you finally ovulate those eggs, and then you become gravid. And when you looked at these things over time as they went through reproduction, as they got bigger and bigger eggs, both in their ovaries and now in their oviducts, and then when they were carrying eggs, over time, they lost endurance once again as they're carrying more and more weight. So once again, just illustrating this idea that a given reproductive bout requires a lot of energy and affects things that might be important for your fitness, like endurance. So another paper mentioned in your book looks at North American species of birds and South American species of birds. In North America, we tend to have birds that produce large clutches. And so they put a lot of energy into creating a large number of eggs, but as a result, they don't survive very well to the next breeding season. In South America, birds have smaller clutches of eggs, but they tend to survive from year to year. And so they were attempting to get at why this basic pattern happens. Birds in North America produce lots of eggs and have low year-to-year survivorship versus South America with fewer eggs and high adult survivorship to the next breeding season. And so what they did was they exposed nests to different kinds of predators. Hawk predators, which tend to be predators of adult birds, and nest predators that jays that tend to be nest predators. So is the predation affecting the parents, or is the predation affecting the reproductive effort? And then they looked at the tendency of the birds to reduce nest visits in response to these two different kinds of predators. South American birds responded more strongly to hawks, so they tended to value adult survival over the survival of their offspring, whereas North American birds responded more strongly to jays that are the nest predators. And so here is the figure from your book. This is under jay predation. The North American species tended to respond more to the jay model, and in South America, the South American species tended to respond more strongly to the hawk predator. And so the idea behind this is that, going back to the first of these slides, in South America, if you're not producing very many offspring each year, but what you're doing is maximizing adult survival so that you get multiple reproductive bouts, it's not as important to your fitness if you lose one of your clutches. What's more important to your fitness is that you yourself stay alive from year to year. If, on the other hand, you're investing heavily in your current reproductive effort, it's more important to make sure that that reproductive effort is successful, because you've invested so much energy that chances are you're not going to be surviving to the next year. And so North American species should respond more strongly to nest predators, and South American species should respond more strongly to predators that are attacking the adult bird. And that is exactly what they found, as illustrated in this figure. One of the things about North American and South American birds is the whole reason that birds migrate. Presumably, birds are migrating in order to have less competition for food. And so our traditional way of thinking about birds, when you think about birds migrating, which direction are they migrating?
South, but you told us it's actually north, and they migrate north for whatever.
Oh, see, I've already spoiled you. So we normally think of birds migrating south for the winter. But what happens when those birds get down into Central America is they find themselves in an environment that has much more competition, because there are a lot of resident bird species already there. And a better way of thinking about bird migration would be to think of these bird species as birds that evolved in the south and they migrate north for the summer because they're entering an environment that, as the seasons move from spring into summer, the environment is flush with food, with a depauperate bird community that's not there to eat that food. And so they migrate north to stock up on food so that they can put a lot of that food energy into breeding. They produce a large clutch of eggs, but then they've kind of blown all of their energy, and as a result, they have lower survival. And so they're maximizing that flush of energy that is not as tightly competed for in the grasslands, for example, of North America, rather than staying in Central America and competing more heavily against other birds. Another paper mentioned in your textbook deals with a flexible system of parental care. In this fish species, this is a type of cichlid. It's a neotropical species. There are a couple of species that get into the United States that are in this family, but only in the southern United States. But these guys have flexible care, and either the male can care or the female can care. And the amount of care actually is dependent upon what the sex ratio is of the population that you find yourself in. So under control conditions, males are generally going to desert. Where there is a male biased sex ratio, males will, wait. Sorry. Under control conditions, males tend to care a lot and not desert. When there's a male bias, they tend to stay and care and not desert. But when there is a female bias, they tend to desert more often. Why would this change in sex ratio result in these changes in the male behavior?
Because if there's a lot of females available, then there's more chance you can go get another mate.
Your probability of finding another mate when there are a lot of females around is quite high. And so you will tend to desert rather than staying in care, because you're going to increase your fitness by mating with more available females than you will by caring for the offspring that you currently have. In a similar way, for female care versus desertion, under control conditions, females stay and care a lot. When there is a male bias, female care goes down and female desertion goes up. And when there is a female bias, it's more like the control situation. Once again, somebody other than Alexis, what's leading to this pattern?
Females can have more reproductive bouts because there are more males available.
Exactly. It's the exact same story as with the males. And so in this case, males and females are behaving exactly the same way. What determines the behavior is that how many of the opposite sex are available for more mating opportunities. So whenever the sex ratio is biased such that you're the rare individual, you're the rare sex in the population, you will tend to be the one that deserts and goes off and finds additional mating opportunities. And in a sense, in a female bias situation, males are more valuable, and so males can basically take advantage of that value. In a male biased population, females are more valuable, and so they once again take advantage of that added value by seeking out more mates. This is one of the reasons when we talked earlier in the semester about sex ratios, you tend to have sex ratios converging on 50-50%, 50% males, 50% females, because as one sex becomes less and less common, it becomes more and more valuable to produce that sex. So if you have genes in the population that will produce more of that sex, those genes will be represented in the next population at a higher proportion, because that's the limiting resource where reproduction is concerned. The other thing that they did in the study is they varied the relative size of males and females. This basically manipulates the benefits. Smaller males bring fewer benefits of biparental care. As a result, smaller males deserted more often. Uniparental care was more often in small clutches. So it's not just ratio, but it's also the relative sizes of males and females can influence who's deserting. And then there's this weird thing that your book talks about, which is filial cannibalism. This is basically when you eat your young. Yay! So you can eat part of your brood to improve care to the remaining brood members if you produce too many offspring and they're too much to handle. Rather than spreading your reproductive investment around a bunch of offspring, you can concentrate that into a fewer number of offspring. And one of the ways to do that is to just get rid of some of your offspring. And a good way to get rid of them is to consume them. I'm not advocating this as a strategy for humans. We're talking about other organisms in this case. One of the things that can happen is if it looks like your current brood is going to fail, for example, if you find yourself in a drought and there's not a lot of food for provisioning your current reproductive bout, another thing that you might do is you might eat all of your brood, take that energy back into yourself, and then use that energy in a future reproductive effort under conditions that might be more amenable to successful reproduction. So one of the things that, one of the papers that is mentioned in your book is once again a fish study. It's a fish study, is that right? I'm pretty sure this was a fish. I'll have to go back and look again. It's been a couple of days since I looked at this. But basically, if they reduced the size of the brood, or if there was a possibility of cuckolding, this tended to increase filial cannibalism. And if they provided food supplements, that actually reduced filial cannibalism. And so when you have enough food to get by, you don't eat your young as often. If you've been cuckolded such that some of those offspring are not yours, there's nothing to stop you from eating them because you don't want to be providing parental care to offspring that are not your own. And also under periods of brood reduction, when broods are not surviving for environmental reasons, you might eat your offspring to save that energy for a future reproductive effort. And then, of course, mate attractiveness is always important. Parents tend to invest more in offspring of attractive mates. Zebra finches, they found that there was more parental effort depending on the attractiveness of the parent. The attractiveness of the parent in this case was all quantified with plumage characteristics. And so birds vary from individual to individual in terms of the color pattern. And this is especially true of birds. Mallard ducks tended to have larger eggs when they were paired with more attractive mates. And peacocks tended to produce more eggs when they were paired with males that had more elaborate tail feathers, longer and more elaborate tail feathers. So once again, this is all from birds, but basically, depending on what measure of attractiveness you're talking about. And we know that in peacocks, the tails are a sexually selected character. The larger, more elaborate tail that you have, the more eggs the female would produce after mating with you. So lots of things influence parental investment. Now, your book presents a game theoretical perspective for thinking about sexual conflict. And so this model attempts to quantify when parents should desert their offspring and either leave the offspring without any parental care by either parent, or shift that responsibility of parental care to the other parent. On the next slide, there's the table from the figure from your book, but I don't want us to look at that because, quite frankly, I think this obscures things rather than clarifies things. So I want you to stay on this slide and work through this with me. I knew we were going to be doing this today, so it's actually up on the board behind me. So I'm going to go through this with you on the board. Can you guys see all this quick? clearly?
Yes.
Okay, I moved my computer closer so it would be bigger on the screen. So this model involves basically three kinds of things that are important. The probability of the survival of offspring. P sub 0 is probability of survival with 0 parents. P sub 1 is with 1 parent. P sub 2 is with 2 parents. So obviously, the probability of survival is highest with 2 parents. It goes down with only 1 parent, and it goes way down with 0 parents. Then, if the male deserts, there's a certain probability that he will find another mate. And then the fertility of the females is dependent upon how much energy they're putting into parental care. If they desert, they're not putting as much energy into parental care, so their fertility is higher. If they stay in care, their fertility goes down because they're producing fewer numbers of eggs because they've invested some of their energy in the current bout of eggs. So the big W is always going to be larger than the little w. And so the way you should think about these things is you can think about what are the rewards to the male and to the female under different conditions. So the rewards to the male and female, if the male deserts and the female deserts, they both abandon the offspring. Well, if the male deserts, the survival of the offspring is P sub 0. If the female is deserting, she's producing big W number of eggs. But if the male deserts, this isn't his only reproductive opportunity. He has 1 plus P probability of finding another mate, and that other mate is going to be producing presumably the same number of offspring. So this implies, the 1 implies that he's already mated, and he has a certain probability of mating again. And so those are the rewards that accrue to the male parent. The number of offspring of the female times the survival probability of those offspring plus the probability that he's going to find another mating.
Wait. Why is it the female's carrying, but you have P0?
This isn't, both of the male is deserting and the female is deserting.
So, but you said the small w was fertility of a carrying female.
Yes, this is a small w. Small w's have wings.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Is that more helpful?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. So if that's the case, what is the fitness benefits or the fitness rewards for the female if she deserts?
Low.
Well, I mean, what is it in terms of these variables?
The big W, right?
Yep, the big W.
What?
Multiply times what?
P0.
Yep, P sub 0. Yep. So we can figure out what the rewards are for both males and females if both of them desert. By just looking at what these things.
Why is there no 1 plus P for the female if it's deserting? Because couldn't the female find another mate?
One of the assumptions here is that the males will tend to take on extra mates, but the females will not.
Okay, I'm still confused about how Jack got the WPO thing.
It's the fertility of a deserting female multiplied times the probability of survival of those offspring with no parents.
I think why Alexis is confused is because you have like the rewards and you say, okay, the male deserts, and then you have the next line where the female deserts, assuming that only one parent is deserting. So why?
Oh, no. This is a situation where both of the parents are deserting. Because we could also calculate the rewards when the male deserts and the female cares.
So does the top line, okay, so you're saying the top line of what you wrote next to male desert only applies to males, or it applies to the whole situation?
Only applies to males. Because he's going to get whatever the reproductive efforts are of the female, and he's also going to get any future reproduction that he gets with another female as a result of having deserted.
So what is the, I'm sorry, what is the one? Now I'm all confused.
If the male reproduces once only, what does he get out of it?
One brood?
He gets the female's eggs,
Uh-huh.
which is W. That's the big W because she's also deserting. And he gets whatever the probability of survival of those offspring are, knowing that the female is also deserting. So the first scenario is everybody deserts, everybody leaves.
Got it.
But in addition to that, he gets 1 times that because he reproduced once. But he gets more than that if he can go off and find another female.
Assuming
that
that
only
female he finds also deserts.
Assuming that a female, this is a situation where everybody deserts. So this is basically looking at a population of individuals where everybody in the population deserts.
Okay.
Okay. The female, one of the assumptions of the model is that she doesn't reproduce twice, and as a result, she only gets her current reproduction times the probability of survival of having no parents. We could do it if the male deserts. If the male deserts, once again, if the male deserts and the female cares, does he get this same reproduction?
He also gets P1, right?
But does he get the same reproduction if she cares?
He gets the same W, but a different P1. Or
You get the same W?
different P.
No, you get a little W.
You get a
wait,
little
yeah, because
W.
she's staying. Yeah, that's right.
She's staying, but she's providing parental care, so you get a higher survival, but you still get, because you're the male deserting, you get an added bonus of 1 plus the probability of finding another mate. And then the female caring just gets the little W and the P1. So you can figure out what the rewards would be for any scenario that you might envision.
So if the female deserts, does then she get a little 1?
What would it be in this situation? One parent is still providing care, right? So both parents get what in terms of offspring survival?
P1.
P sub 1. The male is staying to care, so what does he get in terms of number of offspring from the female?
Big W?
Gets a big W. The female, does he then get any opportunities at future reproduction?
No.
He doesn't. So what does the female have in terms of her reproduction?
Little W.
But she's
Big.
deserting.
The
Big
Big
W.
W because she's deserting. So she can blow all of her energy in that one reproductive effort.
Can't
So
she
in
do
this case-
1 plus P? Can't
No,
she?
because presumably she's used all of her energy in this one reproductive effort, which is why the big W is bigger than the little w.
Gotcha.
So this is just how you can calculate the rewards. But The advantage of this is that it tells you also what are the conditions under which you shouldn't be doing this. And so let's just stick with this first scenario. I kind of got off track a little bit. If these are the rewards, what would cause a male to stay in care? And so if we think about the male, for the male to desert, his current idea has to be greater than him staying and caring. And what is his rewards for staying and caring?
P1.
P1 times what?
Is the female thing or no?
This is assuming that the female still deserts. What would make the male stay in care?
Wouldn't he stay if staying and caring created a better success rate for him?
Yes. So in order for him to stay deserting, this has to be a better deal than him staying and caring. So if he's going to desert, the only reason he would desert is if deserting is better off than staying and caring. So we have to know what the rewards are for him staying and caring.
Big W plus
Big
P1
W.
times T1.
As a result of this, we see W is on both sides of this inequality. We can divide out the W, and that leaves us with the conditions under which males should desert. Males should desert when the probability of surviving offspring with 0 parents times his future reproduction is greater than the survival of offspring with 1 parent.
So what is what do you have? What does mole mean?
Pardon?
You have
Male.
Oh,
So
male.
this is a male. The male, as long as this is true, the male will desert. If this is not true, then he should stay in care. We can do a similar thing for the female. What has to be true for the female to desert rather than staying and caring? Her reproductive output, her reward there has to be greater than what?
We're talking about when females should desert.
So this is when females should desert. So we're assuming that females are deserting. What are the conditions under which females would not desert? The only reason that they desert is because this is greater than whatever the alternative is. What is the alternative for them?
The little W times P1.
Yeah, the reward of them staying and caring. They suffer a reduced number of eggs, but then they gain something in increased survival. So in order for them to desert, big W times P sub 0 has to be greater than little w times P sub 1. If either of these things is not true, the individuals will stay in care.
What's the situation for both parents?
Pardon?
Like, what is the situation for biparental care in this case?
Well, it would be difficult to envision going from total desertion to biparental care. So we generally do it in 2 stages. But you could certainly do this for biparental care. So all we have to do over here is say, well, what do the 2 individuals gain with biparental care? Well, their reproductive rewards are P2, because now both of them are staying. But what are the number of offspring that are produced by the female? The number of eggs produced by the female?
Little w?
little w. So in order to stay deserting, this probability of survival of offspring with no parents plus the added probability of reproducing again would have to be greater than the probability of survival with two parents and the reduced egg production of a female who stays and cares. So that would mean that what has to be true of survival of offspring without any parental care? Would that survival have to be relatively low or relatively high? To make deserting more profitable than staying and then having both parents stay in care.
It'd have to be pretty high, right?
Yeah, it would have to be really, really high, much higher than you might expect, especially if you're thinking of something like a bird. In order for this to be greater than this, these inequalities over here have to be much more like this than like this. Does that make sense? Very little differences in survival depending on the number of parents who are staying and caring versus very big differences in survival of offspring as a function of parental care. Does that make sense?
You're saying very big differences is not good?
No, I'm just saying if this value is going to be bigger than this value, the difference between survival with two parents and survival with zero parents, that can't be a very big difference.
Okay.
If it is, if P2 is way better than P sub 0, then it's very difficult for this to be bigger than that. In the same way, if the disparity between the number of offspring that a female produces when she deserts versus when she stays and cares, if that difference is really big versus if that difference is tiny, that will also change this equation somewhat. So once again, in order for this inequality, for this side to be bigger than this, the difference between survival of offspring with zero parents and survival of offspring with two parents, that difference can be relatively small. Or for this to be bigger than that, the number of offspring that you gain by deserting is way, way, way bigger than the number of offspring that you gain when you stay in care. So what this model does is it allows you to think about what are the kinds of benefits of parental care. Are the benefits of parental care small? And what are the costs of parental care? If the benefits of parental care are relatively small on the survival side and the costs of parental care are relatively high in terms of number of eggs, then you should expect individuals to desert, because there's not much difference between surviving with no parents and surviving with two parents, and you lose a lot of reproductive effort as a result of providing parental care. Well, if those two things are true, there's no reason to provide parental care, because parental care doesn't make that much difference in survival, but it has a huge effect on the number of eggs that you produce. If this is true and this is true, we should expect individuals to desert. Does that make sense?
I think this is a self-processing issue.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to go through it this way is because I think when you just look at the table that is on the next slide, you lose yourself in all those things that are in the table, and you don't have the opportunity to go through and process it this way. So I want you to go through and process it this way, because I think this becomes gibberish to you if you're not working through the math on your own. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think your way of explaining definitely helped.
yeah, the book
Okay.
is very confusing, and I just skipped over pretty much the whole thing.
Okay, exactly. That's what I'm wanting you to not do. So I feel like my way of explaining it is not very productive, but evidently maybe it's more productive than what the book is doing.
Yes.
So what I want you to do for homework, because we're at 132 right now, is there are, without looking at the next sheet, the next slide in the PowerPoint, I realize that's going to be a huge amount of self-discipline. We've done this for what are the rewards for when both parents desert, and what would cause them to stop deserting and staying and caring. Do this for when the male cares and the female deserts. Do this for when the male deserts and the female cares. So this is one set of conditions. This is another set of conditions. And do it for when the male cares and when the female cares. And in each of these things, figure out what the rewards are, and then also figure out under what conditions would we expect these things to not be doing what they're doing.
But to be clear, in the equation, like in that equation you have right there, when the PO times 1 plus P is greater than the little w times P2, that's when they
that's when they desert, yes.
Right. So the condition in which they don't do that is the opposite.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is exactly right. So in my notes that I have as I was getting prepared, this must be true, otherwise the male will care. This must be true, otherwise the female cares. Okay? And if you don't believe me, here it is in my own notes. This is the rewards. Therefore, that must be true, or the female will care, and that must be true, or the male will care. So work through the rest of these. This will maybe help you process this a little better, and then we'll pick up here on Monday.
If we do these on our own, which we will, can we go over them on Monday?
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. This is exactly where we'll start on Monday.
Okay, cool beans.
Are
Other
we
question?
going to continue going through the rest of this on Monday, or and then whatever we get up to, that's what will potentially be in the exam, or at what point?
Yes, like always. Like always. What we've covered together will be on the exam.
Okay, does that stops on Monday though, not today?
Yes, that stops on Monday.
Okay.
End of class on Monday.
Okay.
So if we don't finish the family conflict thing by the end of Monday, then we'll just put that on the last exam.
Which is the final, right?
Which is the final, which will have a comprehensive portion, and we'll also cover material that we've covered since exam 3.
I think on the schedule we had family conflict for next Thursday.
Oh, well, maybe I wasn't thinking of finishing all of this by Wednesday or by Monday anyway. So family conflict is getting more into like parent-offspring conflict. So depending on how far we get through parental care, finishing up, because parental care basically in one way can be thought of as conflict between male and female parents, but parental care can also be thought of as being a conflict between parents and offspring, because offspring want more parental care than perhaps parents want to provide.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're all tied together. This is all still chapter 8. The question is just, how far do we get through chapter 8 by the end of class on Monday?
Okay. But
whatever we get through on Monday, that's what will be on the test.
And will we do you think we'll move into chapter 9 next week if we get through more, or do you think we'll just take Thursday off or?
No, I suspect that we'll probably pick up on Monday. Probably by Monday, we'll be in meeting systems.
Yeah, by Thursday, you mean?
No, by Monday. So we might get there on Thursday, but we might not get there until Monday. It just depends on how quickly we do.
Okay. Okay.
Because we still have to decipher all of this on Monday.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Rip.
All right. Okay.
I'm gonna stick around because I have a question for you, but it's just for me.
Okay. All right. I hopefully have gotten to everybody's emails that you guys had about the literature review and things like that. If I've missed an email, drop me another email to remind me, because I kind of went through them just starting at the most recent ones and worked my way down until I started seeing my replies to you. So I think I've gotten them all, but I might have missed one. All right. I'll see you guys on Monday.
See ya. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right.